Now, one of the things I want you to kind of understand is that when you start getting into discussions on inherited IRAs or even inherited Roth IRAs, there are so many different situations and so many different aspects. It can be overwhelming. I'm sure Oscar would agree that we want you to understand and walk away with a bigger picture, but don't go and take this advice and then just go do something. You've got to make sure you're working with a qualified person, and more importantly, that they have the right software that allows them to not just guess what you should do, but really confirm what you should do. Hi, I'm Annette Bau, host of the Wealth Inside and Out podcast and founder of the Millionaire Insider. My mission is to help you simplify the money game so you can create a financially secure and fulfilled life without having to have a PhD or spend countless hours on your finances. You're going to learn how to think like a millionaire, stop worrying about money and wondering if your financial house is truly in order, and instead spend your time doing what you love. With over 3 decades advising 7, 8, and even 9-figure millionaires, and now joining that elite group, I'm in a unique position to help you make the best financial choices so you can create a secure financial future and retirement you love. This is the Wealth Inside and Out podcast. Today's free resource is our retirement plan checklist. You can go to themillionaireinsider.com/RPC. While we're talking about inherited IRAs today, creating a plan for your retirement is a critical first step. This checklist is going to provide you insight into the various issues that will impact your retirement to ensure you're not missing critical matters. This guide can help you double check and ensure that you are prepared for the next stage of your life. You can go to themillionaireinsider.com/RPC to access the retirement plan checklist. For today's show notes, you can go to themillionaireinsider.com/120. All materials and intellectual property are copywritten by themillionaireseries.com. This information is for educational purposes only. It is not intended to replace any advisor or specialist or to provide any investment, financial, tax, retirement, planning, or healthcare advice. So let's dive into inherited IRAs, what every beneficiary needs to know. In this episode, what we want you to walk away with is a bigger picture of an inherited IRA. And you're going to understand some of the differences between eligible and non-eligible designated beneficiaries, how required minimum distributions vary depending on when the original account holder passed away, and how an inherited IRA is going to be distributed as far as from an estate planning perspective. These matters are all going to impact you depending on your age and depending on the person whose IRA it was. So it's just critical that you understand that. Now, I'm going to give you a link. I asked Oscar Alvarez to come join us because he is an expert at IRAs and Roth IRAs. So welcome, Oscar. It's great to have you on the podcast.
Great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, you're welcome. What I want to start with is the basics. And some of you may know what this is, some of you may not, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page. So can you just start, Oscar, by sharing what is an inherited IRA?
So an inherited IRA is essentially an IRA, a retirement plan that somebody owns and has a beneficiary for. And so what happens is when that owner passes away and the IRA, whether it's traditional IRA or a Roth IRA, doesn't matter, it goes to their beneficiary. So now the beneficiary has taken this IRA, but it has to be labeled correctly. When you open the account, it has to still have the name of the original owner on there. So it would be like, let's say it was mom's, it was Jane Smith's IRA. She's now deceased, but now this IRA is for the benefit of Sam Smith, her son. So it has to be titled a certain way, or you'll end up with a tax problem if you don't. So it's important to understand that the IRA is coming from someone who has passed away and is going to a beneficiary.
Yeah, if I can just add to that too. One thing that was really interesting that occurred a year ago is we had an IRA that we wanted to just be liquidated and distributed outright because it just wasn't worth keeping it in the inherited IRA because of the bigger picture situation. And the company would not. the only way they would distribute it is it had to go to each of the kids' inherited IRAs. And then from there, they had to distribute it. I thought that was really interesting. I did not realize that they wouldn't allow that, but it was because they're concerned about the tax ramifications and they didn't want to be on the hook because they know as soon as that is distributed, it's going to be taxable.
Yeah. When it comes to beneficiaries, regardless of what the beneficiaries want to do, once the beneficiary stated on that account, it has to go legally to those people first. What they do with it is up to them.
Yeah. And even if it's like, say, for instance, a trust, they're going to distribute it to that trust as a beneficiary. So it's just
Correct.
something to be aware of. So let's talk about the distribution rules. I mean, I know they vary based on inherited IRAs, but can you give us kind of an overview of some of the different rules that apply? And
Yes. So there's really three questions that need to be asked. The first one that we have to ask is, when did the person pass away? And the rules have changed in the last 5 years, and they've been very complicated. The IRS has finally given us some straight guidelines just in the last 2 years. But depending on when they passed away, will determine what set of rules someone has to abide by. And the key date here is January 1st, 2020 and after, and December 31st, 2019 and before. So if it was before, you have some very nice rules that allow you to do certain things that are less impactful to on as far as taxes go. After January 1st of 2020, there's a significant rule change that allows for more taxes to have to be paid in a shorter period of time. So that's really the first thing.
And let me just add to that. So, for most people listening, if that's happened, then you're already dealing with it. So, you don't have to worry about it. As we go through this, many of you are either have just recently inherited IRA or are gonna. So, you're going to be dealing with basically the Secure Act rules, which is after January 1st, 2020.
Right. So then the second question then becomes, who's the beneficiary? And that's where it does get somewhat complicated. So there's two categories really. There's what we call eligible designated beneficiaries. And that can be like a spouse, it could be someone who has some sort of disability, a minor child maybe, or someone, a beneficiary who's not more than 10 years younger than the person who's passed away. I like to think of when we talk about eligible designated beneficiaries, I say that they're eligible in a more tax favored status. And then you have the non eligible designated beneficiaries. And so those people would be somebody like a son or a daughter, grandchildren, or if you're putting it in a trust, something like that, non spouse beneficiaries, essentially. And so that's where I say, okay, non eligible designated beneficiaries means they're more than likely going to pay taxes and they have some kind of rules tied to them for how they have to distribute the money.
Yeah. And then also, you want to make sure that you know the type of it. Is it a traditional or a Roth? Just so that you've got
Correct.
a perspective on that. So, let's
Yeah.
talk for 1 minute about the difference between traditional and Roth inherited IRAs, just so we can have an overview of that.
So traditional IRAs, essentially what has happened is all that money has gone in pre-tax. It has not been taxed. And so now when the beneficiary receives their portion of the IRA, how they distribute it, it'll always be taxed at 100%. And there's different rules, but essentially every dollar that comes out of a traditional IRA is taxed. A Roth IRA is tax free. So the beneficiary actually has more flexibility with a Roth IRA because there's no taxes involved. Even if their rules come under that they have to distribute it within a certain 10-year time frame, they can decide when they want to do it and how they want to do it. They're not tied to anything other than it has to be distributed at the end of 10 years. So the Roth IRA is really, it's still a nice vehicle for tax planning purposes and avoiding taxes in the long run.
Well, and then just to add to that, I mean, what a person could do if they have to take it out, say over the 10 years, is they could basically take that money and fund another Roth. If they make too much money, then they do a backdoor Roth. And for any of you who've not listened to Oscar and my episode on backdoor IRAs, I'll link to it in the show notes. But that's a good one. And that's something that you got to be thinking about retirement. And a lot of people say, well, I don't need the money. Okay, fine. You get the money and then you go and turn around and invest it so that it's growing tax deferred and you can use it for your retirement. Do you have anything else to add to that?
Well, with traditional IRAs, because over the last 60, 70 years, everybody was told to put money into their 401ks, and now they become IRAs. They retire and they move to IRAs, or maybe they're still in 401ks. It's all taxable. And I have so many clients now who say, I don't want to take money out, but now I have to
Yeah. Yeah.
because they've reached a certain age and it hurts them. And so now the tax planning I do now is if they don't need the money, but they still have to take it out, now we start calculating and talking to the children, how do we minimize the taxes? And so a lot of times we'll just, believe it or not, even in their 70s, they will buy life insurance to help compensate for the taxes that their kids are going to have to pay when they get this money.
Yeah. Yeah. And one consideration too in that is figuring out when to pay the taxes. Because if you have low income year, maybe you convert it to a Roth. Again, those
Right.
are all important questions. Now, two things I want to point out. When we originally were discussing an inherited IRA, we were talking about IRAs. That could include like a profit sharing plan, some type of pension, profit sharing plan, 401k. All of those, and at the death would be transferred into an inherited IRA, even if they weren't an IRA when the person died, because in essence, they all flow there. There's not really an inherited pension or an inherited 401k. It's an inherited IRA. So just be aware of that. We also talked about the Pre-Secure Act, which doesn't really impact most of you, but it's before January 1st, 2020. And then the Post-Secure Act, which is after January 1st, 2020. And the real key there being for the people that only have a 10 years to take it out as compared to before 2020 having their lifetime, which is for non-beneficiaries. It's amazing. My husband actually has one that is a pre-secure act. So we get to do it over his lifetime. And it's amazing to look at him versus some of my clients who've had a 10-year and literally how much his has grown because he's going to get that forever. And it's only a portion of it versus having to take it out over 10 years. Did you have something to
Right.
add to that?
Well, my wife has a Roth IRA that she inherited from her mom. And so because of when she passed, it's on a stretch. So we just take a little bit every year for the rest of her life.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, can we just review really quickly as far as the beneficiary classifications? Because I know you talked about eligible designated beneficiaries known as EDB and then non eligible NEDB. But can you just give a recap on who is considered an eligible designee? And the reason I want you to clarify this is most people just think of the spouse, but there are a couple other situations where people qualify.
Right. So for eligible designated beneficiaries, the EDBs, the spouse is the primary one. It can be a minor child of the account owner. And when we say minor, we're talking about somebody under the age of 18, somebody who might be disabled or some chronically ill, they're eligible as well. And then a beneficiary who's not more than 10 years younger than the decedent. The non-eligible designated beneficiaries, the NEDB is what you see it referred to as, is pretty much mostly your adult children. If you leave it to a friend, a non-spouse friend, or some sort of trust, then those are the ones where they will have to do some sort of planning when it comes to distribution and taxes,
Yeah.
most likely.
And I'm not sure if you included grandchildren in there, but that would also be
Yes.
okay. Yeah, that's great. Okay. So now let's talk for 1 minute about, and starts getting complicated. And I don't want to get into really the weeds of this because I think it can be so overwhelming. But can you just kind of give a bigger picture overview of some of the rules for eligible beneficiaries?
Right. So one of the big rules that causes a lot of confusion is when the original owner of the IRA passes, did they pass away before they had to start taking money out? What we call required minimum distributions or RMDs. RMDs, for today's purposes, most people are going to be at 73 to 75. So if the person who passed away had already started taking their distributions, then most likely the beneficiary will have to continue that in some form or fashion. If the person has passed away and they were not taking required minimum distributions, then that the beneficiary may be able to wait a little longer before having to take money out. What makes it more confusing is also determines if it's a traditional IRA or a Roth IRA. That also makes a difference in those two scenarios. So it
Gotcha.
is a little confusing, but those are some of the factors that are important when you're looking at this.
I think the key here is just that is saying you want to make sure whoever you're talking with or getting support from really understands this because you can have an absolute mess on your hands. And not just even legally what you can do with taking the distributions, but that somebody's looking at it from a bigger picture perspective on what makes the most sense for you in your situation. So I can't stress that, but I will give you the link again, themillionaireinsider.com/SR.
I think
Yeah,
the
go
other
ahead.
thing that's important is if you end up in the scenario that you may be in, where you do have to distribute the money over 10 years, then it becomes important to do some planning. If it's a traditional IRA, as Annette mentioned earlier, you're going to have a huge tax burden either every year or one big one at the 10th year. If it's a Roth IRA and you've got a 10-year window, my general rule is, well, unless you need the money, leave it there because it's growing tax free, and
Yeah,
then take it all out in the 10th year because there's no tax implication. That's
right.
a general rule of thumb. That doesn't mean it's good for everybody, but it does make a huge difference on what type of IRA it is.
Well, and the only thing I would add to that on the Roth is, and this is why you got to work with somebody who's qualified, is that depending on what your tax bracket is, and if your plan is to fund that into a different Roth, you may want to be taking a portion out each year so that you can qualify for funding it, even if it's a back door. Because if you wait and then you get this huge lump sum, you may not be able to fund that into a Roth all in one year, is what I'm thinking.
Right. Yes. The other thing with traditional IRAs, if you think about when most people are inheriting these traditional IRAs, they're in their probably late 50s to 60s. And if somebody's on Medicare, Social Security, believe it or not, these distributions will impact how much you pay when it comes to Medicare. And so
Yeah.
that's a whole nother bag of worms that
Oh,
we won't go
yeah.
into today. But there is cause and effect for everything we do here.
Yeah. There are a lot of factors to take into account, and everyone's situation is different. I hope you walk away that you just got to make sure that somebody's looking at your big picture before you make any decisions. All right, I'm going to ask you kind of a question off the cuff here. If a person leaves their IRAs to their trust, but then in the trust, there's not really provisions. Let's say they did say, okay, all the money coming in here, they distribute it. But that money is going to be segregated into this beneficial IRA, correct?
It should be, yes.
Because the company's going to do it anyway. And so
Right,
then the trustee would then make that decision if they're going to distribute it outright or over 10 years. Is that fair to
right,
say? Okay.
right.
And then if you have a beneficiary that's like, I want my money now, well, then fine, here's your money and you pay all the taxes versus having the flexibility of doing it over 10 years.
right.
Okay.
That's how I understand it.
That's how
I
I
haven't,
understand it
I
too.
personally have not dealt with any IRA trust.
Okay. Some of my clients don't want their kids to, they don't want it outright. They want it to be distributed according to their estate plan. But in that case, the trustee is going to be the one that's going to have to make those determinations along with their legal counsel and all that. But yeah,
Right.
that's great. All right. So now, do you have any like other takeaways that are just important for people to know? This has been such a wealth of information. And it's like, I'm like getting my head around because I always look at each individual case. But when you start bringing all these in, it can be a little overwhelming.
Right. Well, I think the important thing is figuring out, making a good evaluation of who you want your beneficiaries to be. And I always like to throw in that, if, especially when you're dealing with large IRAs, large estates, you want to bring the children in as part of the planning if they are able to do that, because it's not only the parents' tax brackets, but it's going to become the children's tax brackets that become important. So you want to get everybody involved to understand what's going to happen. I'm a fan of Roth IRAs. And so if somebody retires, I always do an evaluation to see if Roth conversions make sense. Once again, when you do that, it helps reduce the taxes down at the other end, especially for the beneficiaries. And more importantly, you just want to work with somebody who understands the taxes and who understands the rules to make sure you're doing everything correctly in the most tax efficient manner possible.
Yeah, I love that. And do you have any, I realize every situation's different, but do you have any rule of thumb of what you like to see in, like, say, non-qualified funds, your personal monies versus like an IRA versus a Roth?
I'm a big fan of the Roth IRA just because of the tax implications. I happen to believe that taxes will only go up in the future. And so
Mhm.
let's pay the taxes today, even though it's painful, because I just think as time goes on, people will be paying more in taxes down the road than they are today.
Yeah. Yeah, if we ever get this deficit under control, that's going to be I mean, that's like probably the
Yes.
top thing. That's how you would generate revenue. One of the things I recently heard an advisor say is he likes to see 40% in personal monies, 30% in IRA, 30% in Roth. And so I think the point being is whether you put more in Roth or not is really looking at your situation and seeing what makes sense. Because I agree with Oscar, is it if it's applicable, I really do encourage you to consider Roth. And it really frustrates me because in a couple of years that my husband and I had where we had really low income, and I even have talked to my CPA about it, and she just basically talked us into the thought process that in retirement we're going to have less money, so less taxes. But boy, I mean, nothing could be further from the truth. We are going to be so killed in taxes when we have to both take RMD. And that was a really big mistake and I got it from a CPA. So, you just got to make sure you're working with somebody that's really qualified. At the time, I just didn't know enough about I just wasn't, I was so busy and I was so busy in my job, like, okay, she's the expert, listening to her as compared to really, looking at what the ramifications of that were going to be. So that's
Well,
something that's really
well,
important.
one of the things I do with my clients is I take a look at their taxes and we determine what the net effective tax rate is. And
Yes.
that drives the train of do we do more Roth or we do traditional? And most people married with kids at home, they're generally speaking, they're better off doing 100% Roth IRA because they'll never have that low a tax bracket ever. Once the kids are gone, the house is paid, you have no more deductions.
Yeah. And I think that sometimes you don't have that flexibility because you have well, I mean, you have your employer, but if your employer is matching, you got to take that into account. And, there's just a lot of extenuating circumstance. But I also think a lot of people don't realize they think, oh, I have $1 million in my IRA. It's like, no, actually, you have 750,000, or you've got 700,000, depending on your tax bracket. And they're like, what? And it's like, yeah, you got to do the net amount. You wouldn't say if you had a house that's worth a million and you had a mortgage on it for 250 that you got a $1 million house. Our house is we've got 750,000 in equity in our house. It's the same thing with your qualified money, but sometimes people don't think about that.
Correct.
Do you have anything else you want to share, Oscar?
Just most importantly, I think working with somebody who understands the rules and understands taxes is important before you make any big decisions when it comes to these. And these are going to continue to happen as one generation continues to leave trillions of dollars to the next generation. The
Yeah.
more and more people are going to see inherited IRAs.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So, one of the things I want you to just think about, whether you've already inherited an IRA and you're thinking, what should I do? Or you're gonna, or think you're gonna, it's so critical that you understand how all these rules play in. And by having a game plan, whether you're the one that has the IRA, leaving it to beneficiaries, or you're inheriting it, you want to make sure you have a plan because it's going to not only save potentially you tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, it's also going to make an impact on your beneficiary. So it's really important that you understand all the rules and that you review those with somebody qualified so that you're making the best possible choice based on your situation and, more importantly, based on the amount of money somebody is going to ultimately receive. So I really encourage you to go back and review this. And if you do have questions, go to the millionairinsider.com/SR. so you can get your specific questions answered. And just make a note on there you'd like to talk to Oscar, and then Oscar can follow up with you. On that note, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. This was a little bit of a technical topic, but it's so important because I'm seeing more and more people are inheriting some type of an IRA, and understanding what that means, the ramifications, considerations, and ideally even influencing it now before it's going to impact you or your beneficiaries is key. Thanks a lot, Oscar, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I'm Annette Bau. All international copyrights are reserved. Bye for now. If you love the content of this podcast, please follow and subscribe to our channel so you get notified of episodes, and also give us a 5-star review and share a comment. We really appreciate it. Congratulations on taking another step to create a financially free life you love. If you're not sure about your financial future, or that it's in order, or you are ready to stop worrying about money, or possibly the fear of becoming a bag lady, ending up broke in retirement, or you simply are ready to know your financial house is in order so that you can have a bright financial future, please go to themillionaireinsider.com/NSF. And that doesn't stand for non-sufficient funds. It stands for Next Step Finance. It's the next best step of what you need to do so you can avoid an NSF notice in your future. Again, themillionaireinsider.com/NSF. The number of women who were not broke or poor while working or married is staggering. The entire mission of the Wealth Inside and Out podcast is to ensure you have the information for you, your family, your friends, anyone who's willing to listen to it and apply it so that you can create a financially free life you love. Again, themillionaireinsider.com/NSF. Until our next episode, take one action that will help you create a financially free life you love. I'm Annette Bau, your host. All international copyrights are reserved. Bye for now.